You've said on plenty of occasions that Bitcoin in price is going to go up forever. In your latest presentation, I saw that by 2045, it'll be about $13 million Bitcoin. That's the base case, and $49 million in a bull case and $3 million in a bear case. When will Bitcoin, in your view, or will anything derail that trajectory, in your view?
No, I don't think so. I think that when I gave that speech, it was Bitcoin Nashville in July of 2024, and I gave those forecasts. And obviously, I gave them, there's a model, Bitcoin 24, it's published, it's on GitHub, just go Google it, download it, and you can plug in all your own assumptions about inflation and innovation. The two big drivers of Bitcoin price going up are innovation and inflation, right? Bitcoin's going to go up because capital is going to be created by technology. And as the world gets richer, the capital is going to have to find a home. And Bitcoin price is going to appreciate because there'll be more currency, more dollars, more pesos, more rubles, more everything. And the price is going to appreciate because people are going to sell their 20th century physical assets and financial assets and the like in order to buy digital assets. And that trend is going to accelerate as people get educated, because why would anybody want to own a warehouse in the middle of Africa when you could own the equivalent amount of Bitcoin? They're all going to trade when they can. It's just going to be a question of supportive institutions. Give me a safe way to buy $1 billion of it, and then supportive regulations, and then education. So these are all things that are simple to predict. And that was my prediction in July of 2024. But look what happened since then, right? Since then, we had a red sweep. You had a pro-Bitcoin Congress, pro-Bitcoin Senate, pro-Bitcoin House, pro-Bitcoin president. You have every cabinet member, or nearly every cabinet member owns Bitcoin, is pro-crypto. They're all very supportive. And now you have a supportive Secretary of the Treasury. You have one executive order, directing that we create a vibrant digital assets industry in the United States. You have a second executive order creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You have a huge amount of momentum. What I've seen is a sea change over the past 16 weeks. Most conventional investors and traditional investors everywhere in the world that were not interested or afraid of this asset class, they have all flipped their view to being very curious. So I've been invited to conferences in South America with the 100 wealthiest families for the first time. I've been invited to speak to all the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds for the first time. I've been invited to speak at Morgan Stanley's tech conference, the most prestigious one in the tech industry of tech investors, for the first time. I've been invited to speak at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, for the first time. I've been invited to the White House to speak to the President of the Cabinet for the first time, right? And so there's that speech that I gave on Tuesday at the National Press Club on, there were 2 senators on stage with me for the first time. And so what you have is an avalanche of institutional interest by mainstream policymakers, business leaders, investors. And if you roll the clock back 16 months, none of it existed. The number of institutional investors invested in spot Bitcoin ETFs went from 6 to 3,300 over 12 months. So I would say that institutional adoption is clearly afoot.
Yeah.
All of the regulators in the world will talk about digital assets and they'll talk about Bitcoin. They won't do anything until Washington, D.C. financial regulators take a position. And so the future of digital tokens, digital currencies, digital securities, and digital commodities will all emanate from Washington, D.C. and every other financial regulator and every banking regulator everywhere in the world will follow. And I'm not just talking our allies, the Brazilians, the Emiratis, the Europeans, our enemies or our quasi-enemies or our frenemies, the Chinese, the Russians, everyone is going to copy the taxonomy and the principles that are set in the United States. And I'm not speculating. I'm telling you from first-person knowledge because I talk to them. I'm saying I talk to people in South America, and they say our banks will not embrace this until the U.S. does it. And so the entire industry has been frozen up until November 5th. And on November 6th, we thought things might get better. But if you look at the parade of positive actions that are good for the digital assets industry, good for the crypto industry, good for Bitcoin, I think it's exceeded everybody's expectations. I don't think anybody expected, every member of the cabinet to be pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin. Every member of the cabinet. There isn't any, it's one thing to say, well, we elected a president that stopped suing us, right? Ended the war on crypto. But we went from a war on crypto to every crypto enforcement action getting unwound day by day to now a very, very positive, not just positive in an ambiguous way, positive in a decisive way. We're going to do this. We're going to do this week. Next week, we're going to do this. In 6 months, you better do this, right? That I think is a reason that everybody in the industry ought to be feeling very optimistic, because these are the most auspicious developments in the last 12 weeks that have happened in the entire history of the industry.
Or it could be a concern if in 4 years we have a new administration that thinks very differently.
I'm not so concerned about that. I think that Pandora's box has been opened. And if you look at these developments, they tend to be one way, just like a hash function is one way. There are certain things that once you've done them, you can't undo them. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. I'll give you an example. When the spot Bitcoin ETFs were approved in January of 2024, that opened the entire floodgate, and now 3,300 institutions own this, and we went from nothing to $150 billion. You can't undo that. A future president or head of the SEC could never say, in 4 years, there'll be $500 billion in these things. They can't say, well, I just decided that Bitcoin isn't a commodity anymore. It's just too much in one direction. And once banks start to bank Bitcoin, when Bitcoin spreads through the banking system and there's $1 trillion of digital capital in the banking system, it won't just be in the US. It's a virus. And so the virus spreads. And in this case, that means you're going to have hundreds of banks, then thousands of banks, then trillions of dollars that are held by 1 billion people. Okay, so a new president gets elected and maybe they don't like Bitcoin. You can't take $1 trillion out of this system. So it's kind of like a new president saying, I just, don't think that we should have the flu. Well, I mean, or I don't think bunny rabbits should, be able to romp across the continent of Australia. You're not going to put, the genie back in the bottle. These things are viral, exothermal. It's a fire in cyberspace, and it spreads very rapidly.
There is a question I wanted you to reflect on generally on government. In the United States, we have these short-term time horizons that change with administrations. We have lawyers, businessmen, entertainers as presidents, whereas in other countries, they have engineers. They have 25-year time horizons. Is that a limitation of American government?
I think if you read the Bitcoin Act put forward by Senator Lummis and Congressman Begich, they specify a 20-year minimum holding period for Bitcoin. And the President of the United States has said, never sell your Bitcoin. I think those two utterances by the politicians most heavily involved here are incredibly visionary and auspicious and principled. And so I actually believe that the United States has some very principled leadership that has an ambition to make this nation great, not make this nation great for 4 years. I think the goal is to make this nation great throughout the 21st century and thereafter. And I think that's the promise of Bitcoin, digital capital. It's the promise of digital assets. It's, you know, and I laid out in my strategy, I said, we can create $100 trillion of wealth for this nation. We need principled leadership. We need a rational digital assets framework, and we need to remove, you know, crippling restrictions that prevent innovators in the economy from moving forward as fast as they possibly could.